Welcome to NewYorkBIO's Virtual Breakfast Series, a digital program started in 2020 featuring fireside chats with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. This week's episode features David Herring, Steve Bjornson, and Melissa Bishop Murphy of Pfizer Vaccines, with a behind-the-scenes look at the development of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine against COVID-19, which received an emergency use authorization from the FDA in December and is now being distributed around the globe.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Hawks-Bland, and I'm the CEO at New York Bio. We're thrilled you're joining us for a discussion on Pfizer COVID vaccines today. We have an all-star panel lined up for you. We have David Herring, who's the Regional President, North America of Pfizer Vaccines. We have Steve Bjornson, who's the Vice President and COO of Pfizer Vaccine RD. And Melissa Bishop Murphy, who's the Senior Director of National Government Relations and Multicultural Affairs. We are going to cover a lot of information from the very beginning to now how Pfizer is working to ensure that all communities that need vaccines have access. So with that, let me, as usual, tell you about our questions, because I know we're going to have a lot of people asking questions today. You have a Q&A and a chat box below your screen, so feel free to put your questions in as soon as you hear them. As we go through our agenda and discussion, Derek and I, as usual, will be lobbing questions in to our guests. And then a special welcome today. We have a number of legislators from the New York Legislature and their staff. So we're glad that you're joining us to hear more about the important developments that have happened by New York companies. We're especially proud of that fact. So Derek, I will turn it over to you to kick off our panel.
All right. Well, good morning, Melissa, David, and Steve. It's great to have all of you here. Obviously, this is a fantastic topic just because it's really, on the top of everyone's attention and has been for a long time. So we're really excited to have all of you here as guests and to dig in. I mean, we've been following this as much as we could through any of the press releases, any of the discussions on social media, all of the publications, all of the data, and obviously the journey isn't complete because all the shots aren't in the arms, but it's certainly been an exciting one to get to this point. So we wanted to welcome you here. And David, I think we're going to kick things off with you this morning. And I do like that you have the science will win sign behind you. You did an excellent job. You did a very good job with that. It looks great.
That is, of course, thanks to my 7-year-old daughter. She has gotten involved with the Science Will Win campaign, so it's definitely exciting. So let me just share my screen here, and we'll get started. All right. So thanks again for having us all here. We're excited to be here. I'm going to go through a little bit of the beginning to where we are today. And then we'll have Stephen and Melissa continue from there. So I have to start, of course, on the legal side. Just a reminder, our COVID-19 vaccine hasn't been approved yet by the FDA. It is authorized for use under the emergency use. You can see here with the fact sheet, it's 16 years of age and older. And we do have all of the information on the vaccine at cvdvaccine.com. So I'm going to go into a lot of details on where we are in distribution, and I'm sure a lot of folks are interested in the most recent, but I thought it would be at least worthwhile to go back to where this all started. And it started as this collaboration between Pfizer and BioNTech, and BioNTech is a German small biotech company. They have the underlying mRNA technology, the intellectual property on the platform. And Pfizer had a collaboration with them back in 2018 to start working on an influenza vaccine program together. And when COVID started to bubble to the surface, even more than a year ago, BioNTech started working on different constructs. And then in March of last year, we signed a new agreement with them to include COVID-19 work. And we really thought that this was the best way to bring both our, Pfizer's underlying capabilities with this technology. And you can see a little bit here, of course, from the Pfizer side, which is 170 plus years of research development and commercial experience, and end-to-end vaccine capabilities from all in-house research and development, clinical development, supply and manufacturing, and distribution. And we'll go through a few of those items as we move forward. But really, when we started all of this, not knowing whether we would have a successful vaccine at the other end, we did think that we were set up for success. And now that we're looking backward, we can honestly say that the combination was a fantastic partnership. So this goes a little bit into the timelines. So this is the COVID vaccine program as an overview. And you can see how we're working on the vaccine construct from the SARS-CoV-2 model to the spike protein, which then ends up in a lipid nanoparticle vaccine. And you can see the timeline down across the bottom. It's really, honestly hard to believe that a year ago we hadn't even started this. The collaboration started March 17th between the two companies. And the first phase 1/2 trial started in April. So that started in Germany quickly. A few weeks later, we started a trial here in the US in May. And then we had 4 different vaccine constructs that we were testing. And we waited until basically the last possible minute and were able to then select the one that we thought would have the best profile for both safety and efficacy and put it into the large phase 2b/3 study, which we started at the end of July. We thankfully saw November 18th that the phase 3 study met all of its endpoints. We requested an EUA from the FDA November 20th. We got a temporary authorization in the UK first, December 2nd, and then it was a busy weekend, December 11th through 13th. We got the EUA granted by the FDA. ACIP, the advisory committee under the CDC, had emergency meetings over that weekend. We got recommended and we started delivering vaccine on that Monday. So it's been a whirlwind, and now feels also like it's been months that we've been distributing vaccine, but it really has only been a few short weeks. And I can also tell you as we get a little further, we've already delivered more than 30 million doses. I think the last number is 34 million or something doses to the United States, which is really remarkable. So just a little bit more about the phase 3 study. It's fully enrolled. It involved a 2-dose regimen, just as we have today, 3 weeks apart, 21 days apart. We conducted the trial in 153 sites in 6 countries. It also included 39 states here in the US. Our trial participants were 12 to 85 years of age. And if you look on the right here, importantly, in the US, 30% have racial and ethnic diverse backgrounds, and over 40% are aged 56 to 85. So a lot of work went into getting the mix of subjects that we had to make sure that we could be representative of the population. Certainly, we saw COVID hitting different ethnic populations harder, and so it was critical to have them in the clinical trial. And you can see the different countries on the lower left of the slide that have certainly added to the continued diversity and is becoming an even bigger importance as we continue to do surveillance on the different variants and strains that we see coming. So I mentioned a little bit about our manufacturing capabilities. Here are the numbers at a glance. So globally, we have more than 28,000 colleagues supplying vaccines to more than 165 countries. So this is, again, we thought put us in a really good position in working for, working with and getting ready for our COVID-19 vaccine to be ready to supply this to all the countries around the world. We are shipping, I don't know exactly the last number to how many countries currently, but a significant amount, and the numbers keep increasing as every week goes by. And just biologics, vaccines, and sterile injectables. So on the biologics side, we have 17,000 colleagues, 23 manufacturing facilities in 11 countries. And I think it's really interesting if you see on the right, if you look overall at all of the supply that Pfizer brings in a year, it's 23 billion doses of medication, which includes more than 200 million vaccine doses and 1.5 billion sterile units, which is part of our sterile injectables that supply into hospitals and alike. Just to to note, right, 200 million vaccine doses is a lot. It's our pneumococcal pneumonia, meningococcal vaccines, tick-borne encephalitis. Those are our current portfolio. But I can tell you, and we're going to get to it, that 200 million vaccines is going to be dwarfed by what we're going to do for COVID-19. We've publicly stated an intent and goal to make 2 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccine in 2021. We have a ways to go, but I can tell you, in being in some of the meetings, that our CEO continues to push our manufacturing colleagues like crazy, knowing that every day matters, and of course, every dose that we can get to people is essential. So it is a tremendous supply chain, and for COVID, we have 2 parallel COVID-19 supply chains, one here in the US, one in Europe, and from those 2 locations, we supply product around the world. So just a little bit more about supply, since I mentioned it. So I just have to move these out of the way. All right, so we have 2 current contracts with the US government for 200 million doses. They have an option to purchase an additional 400 million. And so we keep talking with them about what the vaccine needs will be here in the US. 200 million doses being a 2-dose vaccine means it's 100 million people that are potential to be protected. And of course, the US government has agreements with Moderna and other vaccine manufacturers as well. We supplied globally 50 million doses in 2020. And as I mentioned, we have this goal to deliver 2 billion in 2021. And finally, the states are the ones prioritizing according to the CDC's guidance. The phase 1 prioritization, which includes phase 1A, 1B, 1C, includes over 200 million people from the healthcare workers, residents, and workers in long-term healthcare facilities, at-risk individuals, essential workers, and those 65 and older. So phase 1 is a big group. We're incredibly excited about helping support that. All of our doses go through the federal government and then out to the states here in the US. It went through what was formerly called Operation Warp Speed, and we continue to work with them. So Pfizer's way of distributing the vaccine is a bit different than Moderna's and probably other vaccines as they come. The vaccine does have some unique characteristics, one of which is it needs to remain extremely cold. I'm sure you've seen some of the news, but minus 70 degrees Celsius is its target temperature. I grew up in Minnesota, and that's even cold by my standards. So I think certainly that creates some additional logistical challenges. And so what we developed was our own direct shipments to the points of use. That way we can control and monitor the temperature. We created special shippers which hold dry ice. They have these data loggers in them, which you can see on the right. So we have GPS data loggers, so we can see exactly where all the shippers are and their temperature en route. And it's been really fascinating to follow the vaccine. And the last I saw, we were at, I think, either 99.8 or 99.9 in terms of delivery in temperature, in the temperature ranges that it was designed for, which is fantastic. That means the distribution model is working. We ship it in these same shippers when we move it from Europe to other countries or the US. And then we also use those same shippers when we move the product out of our facilities in Wisconsin and Michigan out to the various locations here in the United States, but also Hawaii, Alaska, and other Puerto Rico, other island locations for the United States. So just a couple of things to also highlight, one of which is, of course, vaccine confidence. It's a critical point. We all know that the vaccine only works if people get it administered, and can only help protect people if we do that. We also know that getting a significant portion of the population vaccinated is critical to squashing the outbreaks and really tamping down the distribution of the vaccine, of the virus, and the contagiousness of the virus. And so we're really working together with a variety of organizations on how we can improve vaccine confidence. And we've looked at some of these critical components that impact confidence, including the speed of the development and regulatory process. People asked if we had cut corners to get the vaccine to market so quickly. The answer is no. You can see from the large clinical study we did in phase 3 with more than 40,000 subjects that we went through the same hurdles and same tests that we do for any vaccine. Why we could do it quicker is predominantly that we did a lot of things in parallel that you would normally do in sequence. And so we scaled up manufacturing in particular before we even knew if the vaccine worked. You wouldn't typically do that because if the vaccine doesn't work, then you've spent a lot of money on various manufacturing elements that aren't going to be useful. The other thing, of course, is we had unparalleled access to the FDA. So there's typically a timeline in between when you start a study, when you have a sort of end of phase 1 or end of phase 2 meeting with the FDA. But pretty much we had almost instant access to the FDA at every step along the path, which makes sense in a public health emergency that could happen. And then you can see, of course, there's a variety of other distrusts, and we're all working on how we can and work together. I did want to show you, here's a survey of who people trust, where who the messengers are of this, right? So you can see, fascinating to me at least was celebrities were not at the top of the list. Maybe Oprah is an exception to that rule, but the rest of the celebrities perhaps not. But really, of course, people trust their doctors, nurse, pharmacists, health experts, FDA, friends and family, local government, church, etc. The president is also not at the top of the list of the people or Congress. I think people recognize the political component of that. But we've been using that as we build messages and look at who needs to help us influence folks so that they get vaccinated. The other big thing for Pfizer as a part of this is back in September, we were one of the main companies who signed on to this pledge. And so we and other companies did the same. We thought it was critically important that people recognize that we were going to follow the science. That was going to be what drove what our actions were going to be. And we continued to uphold that. So safety and well-being is top priority, scientific and ethical standards for the clinical trials and the manufacturing process, only submitting the approval once we had the right data. There was a lot of conversation back in September, would we be doing this ahead or of the election, and would that be influencing things? So our company, as well as others, wanted to make sure that the science and data would drive the timelines, not something else, and that we would work to ensure a sufficient supply and range of vaccine options. So that's the critical components for where we are. Here is a list of additional resources that we've been working with companies or organizations or others on this process, because as we've said, we can already see, I've seen some of the data that our folks are in our communities. White folks are getting vaccinated more frequently than some of our African American folks. And so, why is that? Is it access to the vaccine? Probably and possibly. Is it confidence? Probably and possibly. And so how do we work together on all these things to make sure that we really can make sure the vaccine gets to the places it needs to get and that people can get vaccinated? And as we continue to expand the populations of people who are prioritized for the vaccine, this becomes even more critically important. So with that, I know there'll be more questions, but I'm going to turn it over to Steve to talk a little bit more about what was going on at Pearl River, our main R&D facility here in the US while this was all going on. So Steve, over to you.
Thanks, David. So I don't have any slides. I thought I'd just kind of share a story with you about kind of what the experience was. For those of you who don't know, Pearl River is in Rockland County. It's right near the New Jersey border with Bergen County, and a stone's throw from New York City, about 25 or so miles outside north and west of New York City. And that site is the home of Pfizer's Vaccine RD organization. It's our global headquarters. We have about 800 employees there in total on the campus. They're not all within Vaccine RD, but we're the largest group on the campus. And taking us back, the site has a long history. It's over 100 years old. It was a former Letterly site, and it went through a series of acquisitions. And when Pfizer acquired Wyeth, they acquired the site along with the vaccine infrastructure that came with it. And there's a long history of kind of health and vaccine innovation coming out of the site, smallpox, vaccines, diphtheria, antitoxin, typhoid. So we've been there a long time, and we're not new to innovation. But when this whole situation was unfolding, we were at the epicenter along with all of you here in New York. The rest of the country, I think, in February and March was kind of watching this on the news, and it was happening in our backyard. And when we signed the collaboration with BioNTech, much as other places in the area, we were kind of going into lockdown mode, right? And so our campus of over 800 staff become overnight a campus of 350 people, only essential workers that were there to kind of keep the operation going. And our staff were dealing with everything that everyone else was. They were scared, they were nervous. No one knew what this virus was. They didn't know the implications. New York City started exploding in terms of cases, and a lot of our staff had friends or family or themselves living in the city, and they were coming out to come to work. And that was the environment that we and the rest of the Pfizer leadership was kind of saying, all right, now's our call to action. We need everybody to step up and help focus on finding a solution for this pandemic. And so, as David alluded to, we partnered with BioNTech early on. We have vaccinologists in Pearl River that were working with the BioNTech team, trying to discern which of those 4 constructs that were established was the right one to move ahead with. We had, all of the kind of vaccine leadership is based in Pearl River. So we had our clinical team, the vaccine research team, as well as all the groups that were establishing the testing necessary to support the ultimate submission to the FDA. So, over those months of April, May, June, we put in place all the protections that all kind of essential workplaces were doing. Eventually we asked everybody to wear masks, social distance. We separated all our lunch areas and moved chairs around, and it got eerily quiet. The location was there was tons of activity happening in the labs, but it was like walking through a library, because people they were just dedicated, focused, and kind of head down, get the job done, and then go. So we were guiding our scientists to come in, do their lab work, and finish the office-based stuff from home. So to try and limit the number of people on campus. And over that time, you're dealing with a workforce that there's a lot of young people in our team, and so you have a lot of young, very enthusiastic people that are mission driven. Just like I think I would argue most of Pfizer colleagues are very focused on our mission of breakthroughs that change patients' lives, and what breakthrough was going to be better than this one. At the same time, we were dealing with a type of vaccine that the world had never seen before. There's been a lot of research done in RNA and messenger RNA, but it had never actually developed into a product, and definitely not a vaccine of this scale. And that's what we were aiming for. So over those months, we were watching the data. Literally, every group was working collectively, and ultimately, it kind of resulted in our support of the large study, this 46,000 plus subject study. So to put it in context, all the samples that were being generated by all of our hundreds of sites from every subject around the world came into Pearl River, and we barcoded it, logged it into our sample management system, and then tested it to see, and what we were looking for was, we were running similar tests to what the PCR test that you would get, the nasal swab test. So we were handling all that activity, 170,000 samples. And we went to 3 shifts, 7 days a week. And over this time, I kind of forgot to mention, we knew this mountain was coming, so in April, May, we knew that, come fall, we were going to be under the gun to really deliver all of these results. And so we were rapidly hiring in the middle of a pandemic. Yeah, please come to work in the heart of New York, in the middle of a pandemic. But you'd be amazed at the response and the number of amazing talent that we were able to attract. People really wanted to be part of the solution. And definitely in the scientific field, I think we really saw New York and New Jersey and all the neighboring states where our population comes from, our workforce comes from, step up. So ultimately it was just an amazing experience, and I think one that my colleagues and I will never forget. And nothing was more impactful than when we got those results. And one thing I'll say is, I think my boss, Catherine Jansen, who runs Vaccine RD for Pfizer, she did a 60 Minutes interview a month or so ago, and she got a question of, was this a miracle? Feels like a miracle. And I don't remember her exact words, but I like the way that she responded, because it definitely, we hope the outcome is a miracle, but getting there was not a miracle. It was a tremendous amount of dedication, hard work, innovation, and just so many groups and functions coming together at the right time, everybody stepping up. It was truly amazing. But was it a miracle? Did it just kind of happen? Definitely not. It was a concerted effort to kind of get here. So that's the kind of Pearl River experience.
Okay, well, you went through this piece of it a little bit too quickly, so I do need to ask you. I want to actually ask you about the day that you got the results, right? So did you know the exact day that they were going to come? Did everybody know when they were going to come? What was the mood and the scene like in Pearl River when the results were released?
Yeah, so the way it works, I mean, something that important to the company is, a very small number of executives know, and then you make it public.
Right.
But what we knew is we had what's called a data monitoring committee meeting, and our group was responsible for getting all of the samples run, tested, and put into the system such that the biostatisticians could run all of their efforts. So it's kind of a staged process. So we knew that we had generated the number of cases needed to do what's called an interim analysis, but we didn't know the distribution of where those cases were coming from. Was it the placebo group or the vaccine group? So, it was literally when we found out, after the data monitoring committee met to advise I think Albert, our CEO, and the executive team, and that next day we went public. That was on a Sunday. I think we advised on a Monday. And there was jubilation. I mean, the number of people, I've never seen so much congratulations happening virtually, and people, literally, I think I had a smile on my face for the whole week. And everybody was just so happy that it worked. I mean, because there was so much, we had put in everything, and there was a high likelihood that it wasn't going to work. This was a brand new type of vaccine, and we had a strong confidence. I won't say we weren't confident, but you just never know. And vaccine development, just like drug development, there's a lot of unknowns. But it was to not only to have an effective vaccine, but to demonstrate such high efficacy was I think unexpected. And definitely it was the best feeling that, you know, everybody that I worked with, you know, most of my colleagues have been in the business 20, 30 years. There were no days like that. It was exceptional.
I don't think we take it for granted now, but if you rewind the clock when people were first talking about expectations around vaccine development, the general consensus was that if we had things that were between 50 and 75% effective, that's where people kind of thought we were going to end up, and we would be thrilled with 75% with the way that that everyone was doing the models. So I think those numbers really blew everyone away when they came public. Um, so, Dave, I would ask you before we transition over to Melissa, I would ask you to talk a little bit about how you talk to the team and the group now about, you know, really what is almost an even bigger moonshot, right? You've now, you know, harnessed everyone for, you know, the enormous playoff win of you know, going at light speed to get this vaccine developed, and you know, now you have to basically 10x the production, right? You know, now you have to basically go from 200 million vaccine doses, which everyone admits is a very large mountain, to 2 billion of those, which is larger. So how do you kind of communicate that to the team, and really how has the organization responded? I mean, it's an enormous task on top of what was already an enormous task.
Yeah, I think, listen, I mean, the team, I mean, everybody understands the urgency. So, you know, normally first you have to get buy-in on any sort of big vision on, you know, why is this, you know, audacious goal required? That wasn't necessary in this particular instance. And then I think it was really just going systematically through it and saying, okay, what would it take? And, you know, what raw materials would be required? What equipment would be necessary? You know, who has the raw materials, who has the equipment, do we have the equipment, you know, do we need to utilize other people's filling lines, equipment, you know, where could we do this, and what are the bottlenecks? And the good news here is of course, I mean, we understand the manufacturing process really well, and so then it's just you know, again, tackling the problem in pieces and working through and figuring out how you do it. And then, you know, you look at it and the timelines are always longer than you initially hope when you look at them. So once you know, start to factor in, okay, I'm going to, you know, require this amount of equipment, or it's going to take this long for the FDA to look through and qualify it, then you start trying to have ways to expedite, you know, any of that, and we try to find efficiencies. And so that's really what the team's done. And you know, we're starting to see that we've scaled up batches. We're using a 2x batch now, and we're seeing better yields. And so there are those sort of things that you can do in the meantime while you're working on, you know, so you're expanding and increasing at the same time, so that you hopefully get this exponential effect of supply. So that's really been the focus. And of course, people have responded remarkably in wanting to make that happen, because we want to stop the pandemic everywhere, so we don't have a situation where we see continuously that even if you knock it down in some region, country, people travel and it comes back. So we know we need to do this at a global scale.
And I think nothing is more indicative of that global understanding of need than what we'll call the odd bedfellows of Sanofi, Novartis, right? Partnerships like that, which normally would never happen in a competitive vaccine situation, you know, working together to ensure global supply.
For sure. Yeah, no, it's definitely, you know, good examples. Everybody's been in the industry has been collaborating to see what can we do, whether it's in therapeutics or in vaccines. What, you know, sort of, you know, hey, you know, it's like crazy eights. Like, I've got some sixes. Do you have any other sixes? Maybe we can, you know, pair them together. So, you know, it's been really remarkable.
Yeah. All right. So Melissa, should we transition over to you?
Sure. Good morning.
Good morning.
Slides. So I co-lead Pfizer's Multicultural Health Equity Collective. And as you heard from in Dave's presentation, there is vaccine hesitancy that's happening. And so I want to talk a little bit about the role that the Multicultural Health Equity Collective within Pfizer is playing to address vaccine hesitancy and the role they play in diversifying the Pfizer clinical trial. I'm so proud to work at Pfizer because equity is one of our core values. We believe that every person deserves to be seen, heard, and cared for. And as part of that, we believe that is our duty to reduce healthcare disparities. We know that healthcare disparities really impacts people of color in the U.S., that there are major gaps that exist in public health, whether it be due to cultural bias, injustices, or inequities. But we know that we see higher rates of infant mortality, HIV/AIDS, cardiovascular disease, but in particular with the COVID-19 COVID-19 pandemic, we saw a disproportionate impact on Black and Brown people. So in 2015, I'm a lobbyist for Pfizer during my day job. In 2015, the Congressional Black Caucus issued the Kelly Report on healthcare disparities. And they examined the root causes of healthcare disparities and provided a comprehensive set of legislative and policy recommendations to reverse those inequities. And there were 5 areas that they saw opportunity to address healthcare disparities. One was access, workforce development, diversity, innovation and research, community engagement, and action. So what we see at Pfizer is our Pfizer Multicultural Health Equity Collective working in that space of community engagement and action. The Multicultural Health Equity Collective is a cooperative of Pfizer colleagues and US-based organizations that are focused on reducing healthcare disparities across all ethnic groups and other underrepresented communities. And we partner with key groups across the US, whether they be patient advocacy groups, provider associations, community groups, legislative caucuses, to address healthcare disparities among the underserved populations through community programming and outreach. And that's, we think it's very key as we talk about the issue of trust that Dave also mentioned. And our work is guided by a advisory council called the Pfizer Multicultural Advisory Council, which is a subset of those organizations that we work with. And we really rely on this council to help us to achieve a level of cultural competency in reaching out to those underrepresented communities, whether it be around clinical diversity in clinical trials or other areas. And they also help us impact our health and policy work, as well as provide counsel on specific Pfizer initiatives. And so I'm just very proud to say that in 2020 alone, the Multicultural Health Equity Collective engaged more than 39 organizations and supported like 74 individual event activities across the country. So who are our partners? I have to mention some great New York partners since we're talking to NewYorkBIO. Arthur Ashe Institute for Urban Health, SAGE is an advocacy organization for LGBT. The New York chapters of the National Association of Hispanic Nurses and the National Black Nurses Association. Just to name a few, are some of the organizations we partnered with, and we partner around the areas of advocacy and access through our Pfizer RS Pathways program, which is our drug donation program. We also work in the area of policy priorities. I know we have legislators on the call, but there are important healthcare policy priorities important to these organizations to improve access to care that we work on, and some of those are copay accumulators and rebate pass-throughs, because access goes down to the ability to pay for the medications. We also work in the area of social determinants of health. We're working with these organizations to achieve initiatives, to advance initiatives that focus on achieving health equity. And so those initiatives have been around health literacy, addressing systemic racism in the healthcare system, for example. And then more importantly to this call, this area of diversity in clinical trials. We partnered with National Medical Association and National Black Nurses Association to drive awareness and education around diversity in clinical trials. And these organizations are also very concerned about workforce diversity as well. And finally, we want to give these organizations the information to give to their constituents about disease awareness, whether it be around vaccines, talking about the vaccine confidence issue, whether it be around oncology and rare disease, or others like pain management. So on this slide, you see a sample of the partnerships that we've done with our multicultural partners. We had COVID relief grants, the Take Action for Health, Dia de la Mujer Latina partnership. I want to really focus on, this whole issue of diversity in clinical trials. Prior to COVID-19 and this whole issue of needing diversity in our clinical trials, we had already entered into a partnership with the National Medical Association and the National Black Nurses Association to increase awareness around diversity in clinical trials, to ensure that their physicians, their nurses have the information around clinical trials so that they can inform their patients about the safety built into clinical trials. So we were already ahead of the 8 ball, if you will, even before COVID-19 happened, because we have been working with these multicultural organizations, educating them around clinical trials. And so we were very proud when our vaccine, the clinical trial people approached the Multicultural Health Equity Collective, and our product development team said, look, we need your help in getting the information out about Pfizer's COVID-19 clinical trial. And so we work with a number of these organizations to educate their members. We work jointly to develop culturally appropriate materials around the Pfizer COVID-19 trial. We work with them helping to drive and educate their members around where the Pfizer COVID-19 clinical trials were. So you asked Steve the question, how did he feel when the results came out? I can tell you how the advocates felt, because they had been a part of the processing diversifying the clinical trials. People cried, because they knew that there was diversity in Pfizer's clinical trial, and that they could go back and truthfully say that African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans were part of this clinical trial, and they knew what the results would be in terms of how our COVID-19 vaccine would impact their members. So what I say to all of you in closing is that we must have those courageous conversations with a minority and other groups about diversity in clinical trials, about healthcare disparities. We know that there's a lot of distrust in the community because of past misdeeds, and we owe these communities a debt of gratitude for their sacrifices and contributions made to the study, discovery, and advancement of medicines. As NewYorkBIO, we recognize, and the Kelly Report recognized, that innovation and research are key to reduce healthcare disparities. These groups need to be part of the cures, and they only can be part of the cures if they're part of the clinical trials. So I ask all of you to have those courageous conversations around healthcare disparities and diversity in clinical trials. Get the facts, get the information so that you can be part of the solution. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Melissa.
And also, I'll put a quick plug in here. We're in the process of developing and putting on April 7th a patient engagement summit, where we talk about, we work with patient advocates, and we will have a panel on increasing diversity in clinical trials. It's very important. So thank you for that.
It's huge, and I'm glad that both you and Dave highlighted that in your presentations. I will ask you, because this is now, it's the part of the movie where they've done the big thing, but they're not quite at the end yet, right? So you focused on diversity in the clinical trials, and that's fantastic. And can you talk a little bit about really the job in front of you now, which is kind of making sure that the vaccine gets to all the people that need it, and there aren't disparities in who receives the vaccine. So how do you and how does Pfizer, because a lot of this is actually not necessarily within your control, right? How do you actually look at your role in terms of making sure that the vaccine is widely distributed, to everyone that needs it?
Well, I will have to say, I work in the government relations space. I will have to say that more and more governors are recognizing, New York governor in particular is recognizing the fact that there is some disparities in access to the medications. What our role from the multicultural health equity perspective is to build that confidence, that build the trust, so that multicultural communities will go and get that vaccine. Vaccines do
Hmm.
no good if they're not in the arms of our patients. So we are singularly focused on continuing to work with those organizations to build trust, because they had a seat at the table. So now
Hmm.
we need to we diversified the clinical trials. Now let's build the trust around taking the vaccine, and I think that we're making some tremendous headway in that space.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good point, Melissa, because I have friends who are physicians in New York City hospitals, and they said almost every physician or the
Mhm.
sort of HCP has taken the vaccine, but many of their support staff have chosen not to because they're
Mhm.
just not sure yet. So I think that's a good opportunity. I actually had a question for Steve. We've had a lot of questions thrown in, as you would
Yeah.
expect, right, with our panel here today. Tell us about the R&D work that you all are doing on new variants and what the plan is to try and address new variants.
Sure. And I'll preface this by saying that I'm not a virologist. So my background, I'm a microbiologist who went to business school. So I've been in the industry a long time, but I play nicely with the true scientists, I'll call them. So what I guess what we're doing is really assessing the utility of our vaccine against those new strains. So we, along with BioNTech, are actively, as new strains come through, we look to validate whether the protection, the antibodies generated through our vaccines are neutralizing. That's, basically if they will knock down those new variants. And there's been some publications recently. I'm not going to quote data here because I probably do it wrongly, but there's definitely recent publications where we've shown our findings. What I'll say is that, with a situation like this where today we're talking about the UK, South Africa, Brazilian variant. We don't know what the variant will be next week or the week after. So this is a kind of an infrastructure build for our companies to ensure that we have all of the skills, lab setup, and everything else to rapidly assess utility against the new variants. And then I think it's our desire to make sure that Pfizer continues to have a vaccine that will address the unmet medical need. And so if there's a need to look at modifications, and that's something we'll consider. But for now, I think the focus has been on demonstrating that our vaccine is still effective.
So one of the questions that we also had is if this now goes to an annual vaccination schedule, can you talk a little bit about what the processes are that you need to follow in terms of either proving efficacy, changing up anything to deal with the changes from year to year? So what does the actual process look like for you to come out with something that would be kind of an annualized shot? I don't think anyone knows whether that's going to be the case at this point, but have you thought through some of that?
Yeah. Dave, do you want to take that one? Or?
Yeah, I can help you. I can help a little bit on this one. So I think there's a model for this, obviously, for influenza vaccines. So
Hmm.
every year, right, there are different strains that are selected, and there used to be 3, now there are 4 in the most of the flu shots. And there's a regulatory pathway with the FDA on how you do this, and they basically extrapolate, some of the previous clinical study information as they go forward and do it each season. I think it's still to be determined. All I say is that it's a model. I'm not saying that that's for sure what the FDA will utilize, but at least there's a pathway for it. There's also an
Hmm.
approved pathway for pandemic vaccines where you could get a license for and they've done it for influenza, for a pandemic influenza vaccine, and then should it become a pandemic or a circulating strain, you would do follow-on efficacy studies. And
Mhm.
so I think, again, there's a couple of different pathways here that exist. COVID might end up being some hybrid of, existing ones, but I have no doubt that the FDA is thinking about this, and we've been having conversations with them on what that type of model would look like, whether it's a once a year vaccine, whether you need to swap in different strains, whether you need a booster. There's all sorts of different, of course, permutations that you can think about here that we're preparing for. And as Steve said, first we're getting information on how well the vaccine works against some of these variants, and then the variants keep happening. So we'll keep testing them and then come to a conclusion on whether you need, sort of a multi vaccine product, right? You put different strains in one vaccine, or whether you would need separate ones. We're still working on it.
Yeah, and what I'd say too is that it's still, as we said at the start, this is less than a year in, right? So for any vaccine, you want to kind of, it takes time to develop what's called persistence data. Like how long does your body continue to generate antibody that's neutralizing to the virus? And then also, what's the memory of your, like what's the memory response? So even if those antibodies drop down, how rapidly, if re-exposed to something, how rapidly could you generate those antibodies and fight it off? So this is all, every company that's working in this space, not just Pfizer, is looking at trying to understand the persistence of the response, and time will tell. So because that'll also drive the necessity for kind of the strategy for how you vaccinate going forward.
A quick question. So I'm going to flip it around. How has this impacted your development, production, and distribution of your non-COVID vaccines, right? Vaccines for children and adults that were already in the market?
Well, I think everybody in Pfizer's realizing that what's possible, and I think much of the speed, as David mentioned, was driven by working in parallel, doing things at risk. So, and that was always an avenue we had, I think, as a pharma company. We could always do that, but there's a high risk of doing that, and you could spend a lot of money that goes nowhere. So in certain instances, I think we're trying to discern where does it make sense to take that risk, and when we identify those opportunities, then we're going to try it. And we may not always succeed, but when there's a desire to really move quickly, and there's a significant unmet medical need, or a commercial opportunity that would we would benefit if we moved as fast as possible, then we're doing that. And it's kind of caused everybody in the company to relook at their processes and kind of say, how did we get here? Well, we avoided that step, this step, and that step. Maybe we don't need those at all. Maybe we can just go A to B, right? So in a big company, over time, you kind of develop a culture and way of working, and this is a jolt to the system a bit, which is good. I think it's definitely benefited parts of the organization to just rethink how they work, and that's happening across the whole company, I think.
Well, and across the entire healthcare spectrum, right? We've had guests on from chief medical officers of hospital systems that said there will be things that they change that they will keep because it makes more sense to do it.
Yeah, Jennifer, just I think one other point on that. I've been on this soapbox a long time about the value of vaccines. I've worked in vaccines a long time. I think prior to COVID, vaccines were never really considered as sexy as immune oncology or gene therapy or some of these other new technologies. And in general, I would say governments around the world don't prioritize preventative care the same way they do therapeutics. And I'm certainly hopeful that this will change some of that mindset, not just for preparing for future pandemics, but just on the value of vaccines and what they can do.
So we've had a couple questions about getting vaccines to kids. And what it would take basically to get data on children, and really to understand what that distribution would look like, because I think at the forefront of a lot of people's minds are really the central question of people going back to school and that being safe. So so have you guys thought about what it looks like to that we would need to do to get kids vaccinated, and do you have anything happening on that front? What do the efforts look like?
Dave, you want me to do it, or you want to take it?
Go ahead. You can go ahead.
Clearly, so with vaccines, the first rule is do no harm, right? And so we really focus on demonstrating safety in all populations, and so that's why it's a very kind of stepwise approach. And those are the areas where you don't want to take risks necessarily, or unnecessary risks, or move too fast. So that's why typically with vaccine studies, you start in a healthy, adult population, then you can move older, and you can slowly move younger. The challenge, not a challenge, but the reality with younger adults is they have really active immune systems. And so sometimes you can have a response that's much different than what you would see in someone 65 plus or 50 plus. And so we definitely are looking at our opportunities to develop the vaccine in younger cohorts, but it's a very stepwise approach that we work with the FDA to kind of agree, have we generated enough data to demonstrate that we can do this in a safe way? But I think that's our intention.
Yeah, my 15-year-old volunteered for the trial. He was all over it. That is one advantage, right? And we've talked about this on other webinars, is the fact that teenagers, will say, are now tuned in to things that science can do. And I think this will help us long term as we develop an interest for children in science. And Melissa, maybe you can talk about how we develop particular interest in science as a career for communities of color.
Thank you, Jennifer. Pfizer is, we've redoubled our efforts since last summer in this particular area, and partnering with a number of multicultural groups, historically Black colleges and universities. So we're doing that. We're also working with organizations like the NSBE, the National Society of Black Engineers. So we're really looking at new partnerships for Pfizer in this area, because again, it all starts with this issue of trust, right? And so we always partner with the trust barons, as we call them, in the community, to bring in information about Pfizer to their constituents. So thank you for the question, but yes, we have really redoubled our efforts since this past summer to make sure that STEM education we're partnering with STEM educators, and also identifying those diverse scientists that might want to come to Pfizer, and also to get kids interested.
Derek, I think we have time for one more question. Have you got one ready?
Yeah, I think I do, and I would ask each of you how you think this is going to change the way you individually think about what you can do as a company in the future. You've managed to take on this enormous challenge, and honestly, there's been so many things that have worked. You look at the data, and I think everything is working. So I want just your thoughts about what this means for innovation in healthcare and taking on big challenges, because there's still so many of them in front of us. We can go around the horn. I'll call. Okay, Dave, you go first.
Yeah, like I said, I think it's really exciting. I think it will result in more early stage, maybe venture capital or other people putting money into innovation, which just fuels the ecosystem and has lots of small companies like BioNTech. And then you sort of take all of that and you harness that initial innovation and you partner with a big company like Pfizer, and the two together can do wonderful things. So I think we'll see more partnerships along those lines and more interest in coming up with new novel technologies to help advance vaccines.
Awesome. Steve, over to you.
Yeah, just I think building on what Dave said, one of the things, it's ironic, just in the last 2 years, I recall working with the leadership team and talking about the next generation of vaccinologists. Where are they going to come from? Because all eyes were on immuno-oncology. And, if you're a young doctor or physician or researcher coming out of academia, you were often focusing on other areas, not vaccines. And so getting this disease and the response to it has created a tremendous amount of interest in infectious disease, which is really important because it's still out there, and having an impact on a much larger scale. I think, and I'm hopeful that we're going to start to see more and more of the best and brightest want to get into this field. because I think there's a tremendous opportunity to continue growing. I mean, COVID is today's challenge, but there's going to be what's the next one, right? And we need to generate the new leaders to kind of go after it.
Absolutely. And Melissa, you have the last word. I will let you close us out.
And from my perspective, it is building upon the trust that's been created through this process of developing a COVID-19 vaccine, building upon this trust where all communities feel bought into clinical trials, bought into the clinical trial process, so that we are going to make sure that all cures work for all people. So I'm very excited about that, and I think the advocates are as well.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us today. This was a fantastic conversation. We really appreciate your time and the effort and the results that you have provided to the world. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great.
Thank you for tuning in to New York Bio's virtual breakfast series. Join us every Tuesday at 9 a.m. for more discussions with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. For more information on New York Bio, please visit us at www.newyorkbio.org.